Started. I know it's Monday. Everybody's happy to be back after a great Chiefs victory. Thoroughly enjoyed that football game, regardless of what anybody said. I thought the refs did a great job. All right, we'll go ahead and open the hearing on House Bill 2295, and we'll ask Natalie to give us an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2295 requires people who live with offenders on probation, parole, or post-release supervision to report when that offender is not home during required hours. The bill enacts a new section of law to require that a person who is 18 years of age or older and lives with an offender serving a term of probation, assignment to a community correctional services program, parole, post-release supervision, conditional release, or suspended sentence to report any instance that the person knows or should have known when the offender is not home during a time period that is required by that supervision term. That report would be required to be made to the offender's community supervision officer, and that officer would have to notify any adult who lives with the offender of what times the offender is required to be home pursuant to that agreement, and how to make the report that would be required of them in subsection A. The report may be made orally by email or text message, and it shall be forwarded by a written report if it's requested by the supervision officer. The report shall include the name and address of the offender, the time at which the offender was required to be home, any information the reporter has concerning where the offender might be, and any other information that might be helpful. Failure to make that report is an unclassified misdemeanor, punishable by a fine of not more than $500 if the offender commits a new misdemeanor during the time the offender is required to be home, and it's a Class C non-person misdemeanor if the offender commits a new felony during the time when the offender was required to be home. A person participating in making a report under this section shall have immunity from civil liability that might otherwise have incurred. The provisions of this section don't apply to a person living with an offender when the person is the victim of the offense for which the offender is on community supervision. It shall be an affirmative defense to prosecution under this section if the person wasn't properly notified by the community supervision officer of the time when the individual was required to be home under the terms of their supervision, or how to make that required report. And then the state, the Secretary of Corrections, any court services department, and any employees shall not be liable for damages that would be caused by any negligent act or omission in carrying out the provisions of this new section. And I can take any questions.
All right, committee questions for Natalie. All right, seeing none. I just wanted to recognize Representative Robinson, who's joining us in lieu of Representative Martinez today and tomorrow. So welcome to the committee, sir. Absolutely. All right, now we'll hear from proponents. First up, Representative Cindy Howerton from the 98th District. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is a joy to be back here. I got to serve on this committee last year, and I really enjoyed it. So first of all, I just want to thank you for allowing me to appear in support of HB 2295 and for allowing me to request this bill through your committee. The idea for this bill first came to me through my constituents, Sarah Autry, and her daughter, Lila, who are here today and will be testifying. I met Sarah through one of those numerous emails that we receive, and she sent me an email with the subject line, "Looking for my local representative." So we went through that, and we did confirm that I am indeed her representative, and then she shared her story with me, and that is where this bill came from. I'd like to share with you just a little bit of the history of what happened, and in my written testimony, you'll find numerous news reports that were there. I just kind of clipped those articles for you and included those in my written testimony. But in the early morning of June 11th, 2017, Corbin Breitenbach, a man convicted in 2012 of sexual assault, who was on parole and last reported to his parole officer on June 8th, 2017, just 3 days prior, broke into a balcony apartment and strangled and raped a 7-year-old child, Lila. He was convicted on September 20th, 2018 on 4 counts that included attempted capital murder, rape, aggravated criminal sodomy, and aggravated burglary, and he was later sentenced to life in prison. In our conversation last year, Sarah suggested a bill that would require those who live and who allow an offender that is on probation, parole, or post-release supervision to report when the offender is not where they are supposed to be, when they're supposed to be there. So we took some of the language in this bill from the mandatory reporter statutes. The goal would be that if you live with someone and know that an offender is violating their supervision guidelines, you need to make a call, text, or email to the supervision officer. I did work with several law enforcement experts and the district attorney to provide input in writing this bill, and this bill does include their input. The one argument that I've heard in opposition to this bill is that it could put a burden on finding placement for those on parole, probation, or post-release supervision, and that families would hesitate to allow offenders to live with them. And I know that that's important to lower the recidivism of the offender. But my response is, this argument is simple. I believe that by creating this law and being able to enforce it, family members and others would be able to use this law as a reason that they have to report that they are violating. In essence, it's making the law the bad guy, instead of straining the relationship between the offender and the person with whom they live. If a grandmother's there, they can say, sure, you can live with me if you're on parole, but know that the law says that I have to report that. And so in essence, it's making the law the bad person instead of the grandma. I'm just so proud of Sarah and Lila for speaking up and doing everything they can to make a difference, for using this horrific experience to bring good. I know that they have other projects that they're bringing awareness and ongoing projects there, and this won't be the last that we hear from them. I want to add also that this is bipartisan. So Sarah is actually a Democrat and I'm a Republican, and so we've been working together on this and for the good of our community and our state, and I'm proud of the work that we are doing, and I ask that you respectfully consider this bill for passage into law. Thank you. I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Representative. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you. All right, Sarah Autry, mother. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Hello. I'm Sarah Autry, Lila's mom. My husband, Ryan, Lila's father, unfortunately couldn't be here as he's working today, but he asked me to thank all of you for your time, duty, and interests in hearing why we believe that Lila's law should be part of a seemingly small number of commitments required by those who house certain individuals currently under state supervision. I've already given you a small rundown of what it was like for us in 2017 and beyond by way of my written testimony. I don't particularly want to spend my next few minutes trying to describe the entirety of the last 68 months. It's been a nightmare. Lila's law intends to enhance the safety and security of our community by ensuring curfews are held to a higher standard in the future than they have been in the past. It does not intend to create more work for those who already work hard to keep our community safe. Rather, it is intended to be a commitment made by those who house certain individuals currently under state supervision. If one chooses to allow a known and convicted offender into their home for the purposes of dwelling, we would hope that there would be an interest in the safety and security for the rest of us in the community. Perhaps in some instances, those interests are not shared by individuals who knowingly and willingly allow an offender to live with them, but I believe that those interests are shared by everyone in this room. We ask that when housing an offender, it would be agreed upon that should the offender not be home during scheduled curfew hours, that the person or people who signed contracts and jumped through hoops in order to provide living quarters for that specific offender would contact the appropriate authorities to inform them that the offender is not home in efforts to potentially lower the time it takes to make arrests and create a reasonable accountability toward a commitment to help keep our communities safe. If the offender is not home during the curfewed hours, no one has called in, and then that offender proceeds to commit a new crime, Lila's law would take effect. For example, Corbin Breitenbach on June 11th, 2017, violated his then current parole by going to bars and on a party bus. Personally, we don't care that he did that. That did not hurt anybody. He went over to his girlfriend's house. Again, We don't care. That wasn't hurting anyone. He claimed to want to go jogging while intoxicated. Again, not really anyone's problem. None of those actions would have caused Lila's Law to come into effect. While he may or may not have had consequences related to his current commitments, he had he not gone on to commit attempted capital murder against my daughter, Lila's Law would not take effect. Because of the new crimes committed while on parole, and because no one reported his absence, Lila's Law would take effect. Now, I have heard that Lila's Law may create difficulty when obtaining housing for certain individuals in the future. In 2019, my daughter and I attended Take Back the Night in Wichita, where I displayed a poster board demonstrating that there's a multitude of resources designed with offenders in mind that I found for Sedgwick County. These resources include, but are not limited to, college and education, finding work, mental health care, fitness programs, parenting classes, self-help programs, certification opportunities, budgeting classes, intervention groups, and more. And there were many different housing resources in the area already designed with offenders in mind. There are a variety of halfway houses to choose from. I don't believe that Lila's Law will cause any real housing issue for offenders greater than what already exists.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Committee questions for Sarah? All right, thank you very much. Lila, you're welcome to come up and say a few words if you'd like to.
When I was 7 years old, I went to a sleepover. After we had all gone to bed, a man broke in. I did not know this man, and I woke up to him holding me in his arms and walking down the hallway. He put me on the couch and told me to do something, but I said no, so he put his hands around my neck and choked me out. I was unconscious. I thought it must have all been a crazy dream because I woke up back in bed, but I wasn't wearing the same thing I had gone to sleep in, and there was blood everywhere. And when I saw myself in the mirror, I looked dead. And I shouldn't have to tell you everything that happened because they put it all over the news. Sometimes I wish I could remember more that happened to me. And some people say it's good that I don't remember much, but most of the time I feel like knowing what happened to me is better than coming up with a million scenarios and not knowing which one is real and which ones are just thoughts. And the things I do remember take forever to get out of my head. They told me that he would be in prison for the rest of his life because of Jessica's Law. Jessica's Law is a law because in 2005, a girl named Jessica was kidnapped, raped, and murdered. The man who did this to Jessica had done this to someone else before, and that is why it's Jessica's Law. And that was almost me. Megan's Law is a law because Megan was raped and killed when she was 7. And Amber Alerts are a thing because of a girl named Amber who was kidnapped and murdered while riding her bike at the age of 9. Almost all of the laws named after people are because something bad happened to them. These people had to die for there to be a change. Why did it take someone to die to make these changes? I want to help make sure this does not happen to somebody else because someone wasn't where they were supposed to be. If someone is supposed to be home because they went to prison but isn't home, somebody should tell someone before something worse happens. If the person caring for Corbin would have just called him in for not being home or wherever he was supposed to be, then maybe none of this would have happened. These pictures of me show what he did to me. I brought them today so that everyone can understand that this is serious.
You may.
I think that none of this would have probably ever even happened if somebody would have just called him in. I think Lila's Law should be a thing because it could help prevent something from potentially happening before it happens. In 2017, a man named James D. day vault got caught filming up girls' skirts and sentenced 4 years. But because of DNA evidence, they were able to prove that he assaulted a 7-year-old girl in 2015 while she was trying to enjoy her day after church. This man was a stranger to her, and because of DNA proof, he will have to serve another 54 years and 5 months. And if James gets out early because of good behavior, or whenever he gets out, how are we going to make sure that the person who he lives with will understand why it's so important to tell someone when he is not home or when he is supposed to be home?
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Sometimes when we have what are called open meeting requests and open records requests, and if the majority of the people on this committee see what you shared, then it could be potentially open to the entire public to see. And so that's why I wanted to ask the question before it got to me, because it hasn't been seen by the majority. The majority stops with me. And so that's why I have covered it up, and we're going to send it back around that way, is to make sure that this doesn't have to become public. Were you done, or were you?
Yeah,
were you
I was finished.
Okay, thank you. Well, Lila, thank you. I do know that that this is a very hard thing to do, to get up and speak in front of people, to share your story and to share your tragedy. It shows that you're strong and that you've come a long way to be able to stand up here and to fight and to advocate for who you are. And so know that as a dad, I'm very proud of you. I know your dad would be as well. Committee, are there any questions for Lila? All right, thank you very much. Committee, are there any other proponents in the audience? All right, I don't have any neutral testimony, but I do have some opponent testimony. Randy Regier from the Reno County Community Corrections. Randy, welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me this time to come and speak. My name is Randy Regier. I'm the director of Reno County Community Corrections and the president of the Kansas Community Corrections Association. I won't read through, you have my testimony, but just to summarize, I truly appreciate what we've heard here this morning or this afternoon, and my heart goes out to that family. I think it's certainly tragic. I think the reason we're here to oppose this bill today is two primary factors. First of all, it puts a duty on probation officers that we simply don't have time for. Currently, we're so overtaxed, even just to meet the standards that are set upon us, it's very difficult for staff to do that. So adding the responsibility to have to contact everyone who lives with an offender on their caseload, it's not really something that's very feasible. Especially then when you consider that every time that a curfew changed or something changed, the person moves residence, we'd have to have that responsibility. So overall, that primary concern is just the issue of staff not having nearly the time that they need to do that. The second factor within that is that as a probation officer, my job is to go out and work with this offender and try to get them to change their behavior. And I'm going to work with their family and try to get them on board with helping the person be accountable and change their offender. So that lines right up with what we've heard this morning or this afternoon, just of providing that accountability. So we do think that that's very important. The problem comes in is when I have to go out and notify the family that, hey, I'm here to work and we're trying to get this individual to change their behavior. But by the way, if you don't tell me, you're going to be subject to criminal penalties. And so we create this adversarial role of, yeah, I'm here to help, but you're also going to be in trouble if you don't give me this information. For the majority of the people that we supervise, they're not living with the most pro-social people, and so there's certainly difficulties there. The second piece was touched on, and that's just the issue of housing instability. The majority of the people we supervise do not have stable living environments. A lot of it is moving from place to place, but often they have to rely on others, either family or friends, to let them live there. Adding this stipulation that if you're not going to be, because again, it speaks to you have a responsibility, even if you didn't know, but you should have known, you could be potentially subject to penalties. For our clients, it's not unusual for them to go out past curfew, leave mom's house, sneak out at night, go get high. Well, they've just committed a felony, which would then put mom at jeopardy of this law taking effect. So those are really the two primary factors. It's just the fact that staff time and also the issue of housing instability, where we want to work with offenders and make sure that they have places to live. I agree, there's lots of resources in Sedgwick County and some of your higher metropolitan areas, but the majority of the communities, they don't have this, they don't have that. Even in Hutchinson, we've had clients kicked out of the homeless shelter. So your option really is living under a bridge or living with someone. So it's really important that they do have those options. So my heart goes out to the family that this is named after, but we are in opposition. I'm happy to stand for any questions.
All right. Thank you, Randy. Questions, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Rivera, for giving your side of things. You know, one of the issues that we look at on this, the idea that an individual went out drinking, which would have been a violation to begin with, came home and then committed this tragedy, is hard for the public society to say, well, we don't have time to deal with that. And so that I know that's not what you meant. I know you don't mean that we don't have time to deal with things like this. At the same time, we need to figure out what we're going to do here. Often we hear bills that talk about people violating, well, it's just a technical violation. That was a technical violation, going out that night. Not every technical violation is the same, and not every person is out on post-release supervision for the same type of crime. And if we have a predator or a growing predator in our community who is being treated in the same way that a person who is on probation for simple possession of a controlled substance, we're not doing society justice. So if not this answer, then something. And we need to take a serious look at it. I'm not pointing at you, Mr. Aguirre. I know you have a very tough job. And so more rhetorical in the comment. Thank you.
Sure, and again, I was in front of the Senate Ways and Means Committee this morning just asking for more money because we need at least 50 additional supervision officers across the state. That's our issue. We would love to be able to support something like this, and we'd love to be able to be more proactive in the community. We fully recognize that we could be more effective if we were out in the communities and out with the people and spending more time checking on their homes and checking on these things. The simple facts are, it's not allowed. We aren't funded to a level that allows us to take the caseloads that we have and actually supervise them as effectively as we'd like. And that's, again, this is why I testified in front of this committee several months ago on the same issue. We need the funding to be able to fulfill the duties that we have and really to keep the community safe. That's the primary thing that we're looking at.
All right, thank you. Representative Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you tell me what the requirements are for a probation officer? I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to get smart. And so I think you just following with that. I think you just stated that you're needing about 50 more in the state. Is that what you said, or did I misunderstand that?
That's correct. That was our request. That's been our request last fiscal year and this upcoming fiscal years for 50 additional staff. And that's basically what we look at is the Kansas Department of Corrections has standards as to what a caseload size should look like based on risk level. Based on those numbers, on the most recent data we have, we're 50 officers shy across the state. You do need a bachelor's degree to be a community corrections officer in some type of social services field. That's kind of the population we're looking at.
Is there a limited supply of the people applying for this, or is there enough people wanting to do it, they just don't have the funding to do it, or is it something where if the funding was available, you'd have a hard time getting those people to even take the job?
Well, first I'll say I'm happy to take on the challenge of finding the people if I have the money. So that's not a concern to me. When we testified last year before the governor and the state approved the raises that the community corrections received last year, so we received, I believe it's $9.2 million last year. We'd gone through 8 years of flat funding, so no increases for our community corrections program. So until last year, we did that. That raise that a lot of agencies received last year really did help impact our ability to maintain a workforce and to hire. Prior to that, no, we were having severe difficulty being able to maintain that staff. So that is certainly one of the important issues.
Certainly. Additional questions, committee? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much, Randy. All right, now we have Randall Bowman, Executive Director of Public Affairs, Kansas Department of Corrections. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. You have my written testimony, but I think I just choose today to start by acknowledging the courage of this young woman to stand up before you all. Us grown-up adults are pretty intimidated by this spot. They do it all the time. Fabulous young lady.
That's all right.
And as a father, I feel for you more than words can say. Yes, we did choose to stand up and I'm not going to find the words today. We chose to stand up today as an opponent to this bill, not because we don't have a sincere appreciation for the premise behind it and what it seeks to do. But at the end of the day, yeah, there are some challenges that I outlined in the testimony, whether that's resource-wise, referencing that prior conversation that would apply to any entity or person that chooses to work in the criminal justice profession and try to do the work that they do with the resources that we have to do the work. Over my 30-year career has been a limitation, and I'm sure those who will follow the next 30 years will be before you saying the same thing. We need to make the investments in both the salaries of those persons. It should be a field that attracts the brightest and the best. And it takes compensation to do that, whether that's just the paycheck or the benefits or the whole package. Parallel, it takes a serious and increased investment in the programs to try to change the behaviors. And we will fall probably pretty woefully short in the state of Kansas and the other 49 in making those investments. Then the other thing that I'll comment to just here that hasn't been addressed yet, and others might, is we do have a concern about the victimization of others that this bill could create. Housing situation for a lot of these folks on supervision is pretty tenuous with their family member or their friend or their associate. It's not entirely clear what that relationship is. To keep them from being under the bridge. And they're pretty difficult to supervise when they're sleeping under a bridge or homeless otherwise. So making that even more tenuous where, and you see an example in there, just I'll use myself as the whooping boy today, but if I were on supervision and my wife had this obligation, if I have criminal thinking behaviors, I am probably likely to harm her or do things to her more than she is to report the crime. So just taking that into consideration as we consider this bill. With that, that is the best words I think I can come up with at this moment, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Randy? Representative Slingensiepen.
Is there a way, I'm ignorant of what I'm about to ask, so maybe someone here knows the answer, but we live in an electronic era. It seems to me that reporting that someone is someplace where they're not supposed to be could be electronically managed in some way, particularly for that portion of the population under supervised release that might pose the largest risk. It would still require people to monitor the air traffic controllers, or whatever you want to call it, to monitor where those people are and whether they're in places where they should be. But nonetheless, it seems like there should be some ability to do something of this nature.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yeah, not that maybe the industry uses all technology that might exist, but there is technology today. And I think you were going down this path of, yeah, it absolutely then takes a human to follow up and take action upon that electronic recording. I'll use the example of the NCIC, National Crime Information Center system. So if law enforcement comes in contact with a guy on probation or a guy on parole, that's recorded in there. It's if and when can a human see and take action on it that's already extremely limited resource-wise today. So adding to that probably wouldn't help us here. Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
I was thinking more of the identity chip on my dog, actually. I apologize for being blunt about this, but, you know, I assume that the person that perpetrated the act that we've heard about today falls in a different category than someone who might fall in another category in which individuals are not harmed in this kind of way. And it seems to me that there must be some way to defend the public in those cases. And my question is simply, what are those ways? And I'm not opposing any of the arguments I'm hearing. I'm just simply asking the question. There must be another way. That's all.
Yeah, fair. Certainly. Representative Mon, did you have a question? Okay. Representative Butler.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. You know, I read through this bill, and I just went back to kind of make sure I understood what I was reading. So it talks about a person who's 18 years of age or older and lives with an offender. That person then is required to make the contact saying, hey, this person is not where he's supposed to be. Is there a requirement? I'm not legal. I'm not law enforcement. Is there a requirement when somebody is placed on parole or that they have a home address, that they have a location where they have to go and to do that? Otherwise, we're just looking at a person that's 18 years of age and older. Maybe someone's living with them, and if they are, then they're responsible for that part. But if they're out living under a bridge, I don't guess anybody would be responsible for them. So I'm just trying to get a better understanding of this.
Sir.
Go ahead.
Representative. Yeah, so in the parole world, what we'll call that is a housing plan. So yeah, there's a requirement that the person who's getting ready to come out submit their proposal. Parole will evaluate that plan to see if it's viable. They do reject some of those. But at the end of the day, yes, there is no viable plan for. Family won't let them in, friends won't let them in, and I'm told roughly 20% of parolees discharged to homelessness in the state of Kansas currently. We'll supervise them still, I'm sorry, just to piggyback on, but we go try to find them under the Sardu Bridge over here if that's where they're living.
Representative Robinson.
Thank you. So is this what we heard just to establish the Layla's Law, or we supposed to be processing about a budget or the lack of a budget? Because I saw a student, a little girl,
So I think that the crux of it is that community corrections and supervision folks feel like they could do more. They would be more enabled to do more, or maybe even possibly something along these lines in the event that they had more personnel, which requires more funding. And I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of what you and Randy were trying to get at is, while this has some of its own complexities by itself, one of the big issues is a lack of personnel and a lack of funding. Is that a fair assessment, Randy?
Very fair, sir.
That answer your question? Or you go right ahead?
Really.
Okay, go ahead. If you've got it.
really, because everybody knows what a hero is. We're actually, I am, this is not my committee or nothing like that, you don't get to pick that, but we're witnessing a shero. And if this is all that she's asking us to make sure this doesn't happen to somebody else, because a lot of times in our neighborhood, on both sides of the river in Kansas City, you'll hear of domestic violence where just all hell broke loose. And so here she has the nerve to come and stand, and the least we could do is meet her halfway in the middle. If that makes any sense. I
Appreciate that. Thank you, sir. Additional questions or comments? Representative Turk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Randy, I'm sitting here doing research and reading, and I'm curious. I mean, I've heard for years and years about our probation officers and the situation that we have here in the state of Kansas. I have you in front of me. I'm going to take advantage of this. Is there a model of probation officer out there in the states that would really, really help to look to adopt some practices, or in the entire model? Is there a state out there that's just doing the job right?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, in a past part of my career, I had the chance to work with a lot of states around the country on the juvenile side. So I think juvenile or adult, there are people that are doing it a little bit better. I would suggest Kansas is among those, and that Kansas is making investment in evidence-based programs and practices by probation officers and parole officers. So they're focused on risk levels. They're prioritizing resources to the highest and moderate risk. They're doing case plans. They're doing service plans. It is as much, do we have enough of those resources and enough staff, which I think is part of what Randy Rieger was also talking to, is that takes people and labor hours to do the work, and we struggle to have enough to do it to the higher standards that we prefer. So nobody's got it perfect. We're not doing it the worst either, is my quick summation of that.
So all right, so there's no, like North Dakota doesn't have it figured out, or Massachusetts isn't leading the pack.
Anyone has it figured out now.
Nobody's leading the pack. Nobody's like the model for which everybody else bases it off of. It's just kind of to each their own.
Less than to each their own than it is, each is at a different place in their ability to negotiate with their legislature, with their governor's office, for their resources to do what, in an academic standard, we can look to the good research and kind of this would be the bar to get to, but I'm saying that I don't know of anybody who's getting to that bar. A lot of us are somewhere in here doing our very best, as are you as a body. You're doing your very best with the resources we taxpayers are willing to contribute to the cause as well.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, committee? Representative Mon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very sensitive to the concerns you and the other opposition conferee expressed. But what would you say to the question or the comment that if this law was passed, would we not be in securing the help of others who can help lessen the burden on you, because they would be the ones reporting? It wouldn't be somebody, you know, it wouldn't all fall on the probation officer to figure out every day where this person is. Would this potentially lessen the burden on the probation officers?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, possibly, but I think it's parallel adding other burdens to that probation officer to do about 4,000 notices in the case of parole officers to these family members that this law exists, and you must report it to me. Some of those just kind of things that it's a little give here and take there kind of concept, if you will.
Additional questions, committee? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. All right, committee, there's written opponent testimony by Derek Hine as a private citizen. Is there any other neutral or opponent testimony? All right. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the hearing on House Bill 2295. Lila, again, thank you. You did a great job. You're a strong, strong young woman, and I think everybody here is very proud of you. All right, committee. With that in mind, we've already had 3 updates to our agenda for this week. There'll probably be more to come, but stay tuned and we'll see you tomorrow at 1:30. We're adjourned.